Okay, then good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who has just joined this ninth session of the European Climate Resilient Health System course of ASFER and the Global Consortium on Climate and Health Education. A very warm welcome to everyone and also to our dear speakers who we will be presenting momentarily. My name is Eric Toomey. I'm the Fellow on Climate and Health at ASFER, and I will be co-moderating today's session together with Farhang Tahzib, who will be presenting himself in a couple of minutes. But before we introduce our speakers, I will just want to go briefly through the formalities as we do at each session. So just to reiterate shortly the course objectives, there are 5 objectives, namely the first, to articulate and to communicate to key partners and the public the unique challenges of the health system, including primary and secondary healthcare, faced in a changing climate. Second, apply methodology and frameworks for assessing vulnerability and adaptation for health systems in any context. Third, apply approaches for measuring and monitoring the environmental sustainability of health systems and health co-benefits of transitioning to green health systems. Fourth, apply a health equity lens into efforts to address health system decarbonization and climate resilience. And fifth, develop an initial plan to increase the resilience of the health system vis-à-vis the estimated climate impact on their population and to engage with key partners to achieve meaningful adaptation. We are now in the 9th session. Today will be all about justice, governance, health systems, and climate action. Today's learning objectives can be divided into 3. First, discuss how climate justice is critical for effective adaptation and mitigation at international level, with a particular focus on sustainable health systems. Second, analyze the complex governance mechanisms involving multiple stakeholders globally in the context of resilient health systems. And third, discuss the role of WHO and multilateral funds in the developing resilient and sustainable health systems. As every session, this session includes 90 minutes, including expert lectures and case study presentations. The session itself will again culminate in a question and answer section. So you are more than welcome to put your questions in the Q&A part of this Zoom session, and you're free to address one of the speakers directly or more of them. There will be today a part of technical questions and then more questions for discussion and and the sessions itself is being recorded, and the slide decks and all other resources will be made available on the course website where you have registered. Your attendance is automatically recorded during this live Zoom session. Your individual attendance is only counted if you join using your personal Zoom link. Your attendance is not counted, however, if you join with a colleague's link. And YouTube views will not count towards attendance. If you aim to get the certificate of participation, you will have to attend more than 70% of the live sessions and pass the final exam with a score of more than 70% at the end of the course, and you will receive a certificate of participation on the climate and health from ASFER and GCCHE. And the certificate of participation is only available to people who use the same email for registration, all Zoom links, and the exam. And the final exam must be completed using the same email address that was used to attend the Zoom sessions. And the exam link will be sent on the final day of class via email and WhatsApp and will close on the Sunday after. The format will be approximately 25 multiple choice or true and false questions. And participants should be prepared to take the exam in one setting. And with this, I would like to pass the word to my co-moderator, Farhang, to present our dear and esteemed speakers.
Good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. It's a great pleasure to be co-chairing this, moderating this particular session. This could be argued actually one of the most important sessions in the terms of that we cannot have action on climate change without justice, and the governance issues are fundamental. We've now got almost 800 people who are actually online participating in this particular session from all around the world. And the global governance issues are fundamental for us to reflect on as health leaders and practitioners. Therefore, it's a great privilege and honor actually to introduce you a panel from the Climate Governance Commission, and the keynote will be done by Maja Groff, who's actually the founder and the leader of the Clinical Governance Commission and a distinguished lawyer based currently in The Hague. The Commission develops high-impact global governance innovation to meet the climate challenge. And one of its major pieces of work has been based on robust advocacy and action. Maja Groff is actually co-chairs the committee in Kenya of the Treaty Advisor for International Anti-Corruption Court, a number of other international pieces of work. She was the winner of the major international prize on global governance innovation, which is a good read in terms of background reading for such discussions. She's a distinguished scholar, having been educated in Harvard, Oxford, McGill, and other distinguished universities. So we're actually very privileged to have Maja Groff doing the presentations to you. So over to you, Maja. After a presentation, there'll be an opportunity for a few technical questions, and we'll take all the major questions at the end. Please put your chats and your questions, please, on the chat. Welcome, Maja, over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Farhang. It's lovely to be here with all of you. I will just share my PowerPoint presentation. Start from the beginning. Okay, is that appearing well for everybody?
Perfect.
Excellent. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining around the world. I can see the introductions popping up in the chat, and you're truly located across the planet. So as Farhang mentioned, that's highly relevant to my presentation today. I'll speak for about 35 minutes, and then we'll move into questions, discussion, and the case study that my colleague Eoin Jackson will give, and he'll focus a bit more on climate litigation at all levels of governance. And today I will speak mostly on the learning objectives issues, the theme of today, through the lens of international governance, also connecting to all the layers of governance, how we need this governance for viable health systems to indeed catalyze the requisite climate action and ensure we have a true justice approach to these issues. So, firstly, I want to tell you a little bit about the background of the Climate Governance Commission. I've been working on the Commission for a number of years now. We released a major report in late 2023, just before COP28, which took place in Dubai. And the Commission is co-led by a number of really extraordinary senior leaders. Mary Robinson, who was the chair of the Elders, which is in itself a group of very senior leaders. It was founded by Nelson Mandela in order to bring more ethical and visionary leadership of integrity to the international community, trying to support shared values. And we have a few other members of the elders on the commission, including, for example, Ernesto Zedillo, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who are heads of state of Mexico and Liberia, respectively. We also have extraordinary youth commissioners to get the intergenerational perspective on the commission's topics and justice, including Shea Bastida from an indigenous Mexican background, as well as Sofia Kiani, Iranian American youth activist Chido Mapemba, who's the AU youth envoy from the African Union, amongst many others. And just to also let you know, of high relevance to this lecture and session today, the Commission takes the latest planetary Earth system science as the foundation for our work. So one of the co-chairs of the Commission is Johan Rockström, who is the director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, which is one of the preeminent climate and Earth system research centers in the world. And collectively, in terms of all the various leaders involved in the Commission, we're really trying to work from the science as the base. And if we take this fast evolving Earth system science, what should our international governance look like? What should our justice responses be? Rather than a predominant approach in the international system is still from the national perspective, looking up to the international and negotiating various political outcomes that don't always respond clearly and directly to the science. So that's one of our key missions. So why did we put together this commission? Why did we spend the effort drafting our report and proposing different governance shifts and progressive steps? This is from the UN Secretary General a few years ago already, saying that we're at an inflection point in international history. He's noting this is the greatest challenge since the Second World War. We, as a species, as an international community, face an urgent choice, breakdown or breakthrough. So this is quite indeed an urgent warning from the Secretary General. And when you look at this slide, you can see why this warning occurred then, and it's even more so the case now, as 2024 was the first year where we broke through the 1.5 degree centigrade or Celsius temperature limitation goal that the Paris Agreement sets out. 1.5 degrees Celsius is the more ambitious goal in the Paris Agreement under the current prevailing multilateral treaty on climate change for the international community. It also sets out 2 degrees warming. However, according to the IPCC and the most recent science, 1.5 degrees is already very dangerous for the international community for various reasons, and even lesser temperature increases are dangerous for various populations around the world. And of course, these are temperatures above the pre-industrial average. So this is anthropogenic climate change since industrialization, burning of fossil fuels, other greenhouse gases. So just a note in terms of this piercing through the 1.5 degree temperature limitation target in 2024. This is due also to El Nino dynamics in the international weather systems. So this might go down again before going up again. But scientists are getting increasingly worried and concerned about not only this very clear and very worrying global temperature increase, but also scientists are noting that the whole Earth system that absorbs heat, that sort of buffers different changes, fluctuations in the international climate and weather system, is perhaps losing some resilience in terms of absorbing the excess heat. So some of the different parts of the Earth system are showing signs that maybe they're not buffering and helping to keep the climate in a stable equilibrium. So this is also very, very alarming and disturbing. So I would just invite you to really look at some of the latest planetary Earth system science. I'd refer you to the Potsdam Institute website, also the tipping points research and publications are extremely interesting, University of Exeter and otherwise, to get a sense of how we've really destabilized the Earth system at the planetary level and what we'll need to do to tackle these changes. So one of these frameworks, which is in fact a very powerful governance framework at the international level, at all levels, is the planetary boundaries framework that Johan Rockström and other scientists first proposed in 2009, and it's been evolving and refined by the scientists since then. So the planetary boundaries framework, it tackles climate as one planetary boundary to keep humanity in a so-called safe operating space, to keep our civilizations in a space where we can thrive, as we've been doing throughout the Holocene geological era. And you'll see, of course, there's climate change here, but there's other planetary boundaries that we've already overpassed and overstepped, which are fundamentally related also to the regulation of the climate system. For example, the biosphere integrity, land system change, how we practice agriculture, deforestation, et cetera, which are absolutely intimately interlinked with how we manage the planetary climate system. So in terms of our commission, we've evolved, again, based on the science, to not just think of climate change as a silo, but we have to look at other really key fundamental planetary boundaries and thinking about governing them as a whole together. So in terms of the planetary boundaries, keeping humanity in a safe operating space, and this is, of course, fundamental to various, health integrity and health outcomes for humanity, as are the economic effects of climate change. This is a recent study for the Potsdam Institute published in Nature, where the study found that there could be an average of GDP reduction by 19%, which is a huge reduction, and that's an average across the world. It could be even higher in the most vulnerable states, developing nations. So this shows also the disproportionate effects on various populations around the world. And of course, economic damage will have health effects as well. So need for climate justice, how do we think about these macro novel challenges and justice perspective? UNDP has made a comment or definition of climate justice, putting equity and human rights at the core of decision-making and action on climate change. And indeed, in terms of this, functional system, Earth system across the planetary boundaries that keeps humanity in the safe operating space, the Earth Commission, scientists working on that initiative, which tracks all the planetary boundaries of the Earth system, how it's functioning, has talked about Earth system justice. So within the different action and transformations that we need to take across society's economy, we have to do this within a frame of Earth system justice, so that those who are most vulnerable are taken care of, that there's fair distribution of natural resources, for example. So this would address structural inequalities, the social inequalities, and indeed the intergenerational equity issues that are so highly relevant for climate governance and planetary boundary governance. So this is another visualization that I thought might be interesting to share. It's from a partner organization that we work with, the Common Home of Humanity. And what they're proposing is, because of our evolving science, to really understand planetary health as a whole. And I would just mention also, notions of planetary health and the WHO work, for example, and other organizations on One Health, understanding how integrated human health is with animal health, wild and domestic animals with ecosystem health is so relevant also to thinking about the whole Earth system as one, Earth system, ecosystem that now we have to focus on and really make sure that we keep it in a stable state, a healthy state. So Common Home of Humanity, because of these really amazing and dramatic advances in Earth system science, they've been working with another very talented Earth system scientist who sadly passed away recently, Will Steffen. But they've suggested, in terms of our governance shifts, that we should look at the whole Earth system functioning, where you see those arrows, those flows, the big geophysical processes that keeps our climate stable and the other planetary boundaries in a proper, stable, healthy place. They are calling this, in order to communicate, this software of the Earth, and that we should recognize this collectively as a common heritage of humankind, that we should legally identify the Earth system functioning, including the climate, as our common heritage, so we can manage it together. Whereas we can still keep the sovereignty, at the national level, which is, these territorial boundaries and very clearly recognized under international law. But we should, in common, recognize and manage in very robust ways this full Earth system functioning that indeed we all depend on. And just another sort of dimension for planetary health and the way the Earth system is functioning. You've seen the Planetary Boundaries Framework, you've seen the Common Home of Humanity graphic. This is another really important piece of scientific findings at the International Earth System level. These are just some of the so-called tipping points or tipping elements around the world that are interconnected. I think scientists have identified about 25 of them. But these are stable state systems, big biophysical systems like the Amazon rainforest, Arctic sea ice, which has been in a relatively stable state for the last geological era. And now, because of human activity, they have started to show signs of destabilization and erosion. And this might cause them to tip over to a different state, which will have tipping point effects or cascades around the planet. These different systems at the planetary level are interconnected. So this is another very important sort of understanding in order to really take seriously our responsibilities in terms of planetary health and maintaining planetary health. So I'll just move into now, our current international governance and what the Commission has proposed in brief. So a key point I want to make about our current international environmental governance is that we have indeed a proliferation of international laws and norms around the governance of key biophysical systems around the world, but these are very fragmented. There are many, many treaties, up to 3,000 multilateral and bilateral environmental treaties, but we really still lack proper enforcement implementations of these laws. It stays largely at the normative level without really robust implementation and enforcement. So this is one thing we're tackling at the Climate Governance Commission. How can we improve that? How can we defragment this very fragmented and sort of dispersed international environmental governance? And the WHO also plays an absolutely vital role in terms of the international governance architecture and ecosystems. And I would say is really a fantastic leader in raising the alarm about climate change as a key health issue and risk. So in the WHO's general work program of 2025 to 2028, it noted and really underlined that climate change presents a significant threat to global health, exacerbating vulnerabilities, as I've mentioned, in health systems, and widening health inequities. So the ramifications in the health field, as in other areas, really intensify various existing inequities. And the WHO has put climate change and health as one of their strategic priorities over this next 4-year period. So they're very active in this field. And this slide also shows a number of ways where the WHO is also intensively involved, operationally helping different states, for example, the small island developing states, receives funding specialized for making health systems more resilient, also assisting with key climate finance institutions like the Green Climate Fund, the GEF, and others. The WHO is helping to match and ensure that countries get funding specifically for their health systems. So this is just some examples of the way the WHO is really focusing on specific needs of countries in the health sphere, and also countries that are more vulnerable, like the small island developing states, the SIDS, in addition to the WHO having this really clear prioritized mandate to work on climate change and health issues. So I'll just finish up in the last 10 minutes or so, focusing on some of the proposals from the Climate Governance Commission. So in 2021, we released an interim report where we diagnosed, really what we saw is a way to think about the climate action challenge and where we're falling short from this governance lens. So firstly, we observed with partners that we have solutions to mitigate climate change, to really fulfill the objectives of the Paris Agreement, but we're not seeing the actions at scale in time to tackle the climate challenge. Also, which is related, there's a big policy gap at the national level, subnational levels, where policies aren't being developed and deployed at the speed and scale necessary to tackle the climate challenge. And then finally, the governance gap. We have a governance gap at the international level. Our institutions are not yet equipped to really properly tackle the climate challenge and the planetary boundaries challenge. So we have focused a lot of our energy on, okay, what can we offer and propose to fill these various gaps? We released a number of reports at this time, sub-reports on, for example, financing, increasing and finding new, very dramatic levels of international public finance, which of course we need for health and adaptation of health systems. So how do we employ novel thinking to raise the public international finance we need? And we crystallize a lot of our key proposals in the 2023 report I mentioned. So we had a top 10 near-term governance innovation proposal, and then 5 medium-term proposals, which I'll focus on for a few minutes. So these are our 10 near-term governance proposals, and a number of them really hone in on the accountability piece of our frailty and weakness in our current international governance. So we're working at the moment on the climate COPs, which you've probably heard about, or if not participated in, which happen yearly. We're working with an independent expert group. How do we make these COPs more effective, more focused on implementation, more synced up with the science, having the science clear and front and center to those deliberations, and really focus on implementation as indeed the climate challenge and the urgency deepens as we move into uncharted territory, really, for our Earth system and climate system. So a few others which I think are important, I'll just highlight. Number 4, at the moment, the international system has a lot of excellent scientific monitoring of various Earth system functionalities, but there's no one platform at the moment which is high profile, which can report to the international community, for example, in real time. The IPCC scientific platform for climate looks backward at literature. It's in general only every 5 years reporting. But because we are now indeed in a state of accelerating Earth system shift and vulnerability, we need such a monitoring facility for full Earth system functionalities and risks reporting directly to policymakers. Because if these issues are not addressed properly, the health ramifications, of course, will be very, very dramatic. And just a note that, again, on this economic dimension, and this is a key issue in terms of the justice dimensions of the climate challenge, the economic concerns come up again and again. For example, how do we achieve the SDGs and stay within the planetary boundaries? How do we have robust trade and business environments despite the restrictions of the planetary boundaries? How do our economic systems adjust and adapt? So a lot of work still needs to be done in that respect to make sure we have a robust economy within planetary boundaries, and to really rethink also some of our economic paradigms in that respect, which could, for example, forefront human health and well-being to elevate as really a much more key indicator, rather than traditional GDP measures, which focus on more material wealth and accumulation. So these are a few of our medium-term proposals from our report. And just a few I will mention, I will go into a little bit in a moment, are the Global Environment Agency proposal and an international court for the environment. But also, for example, we need to adapt current international environmental law to this new reality of the Anthropocene. So remember that slide from the Common Home of Humanity? How can we legally recognize this Earth system health and full Earth system functioning for the benefit of all of humanity? How can we legally recognize that and make sure commonly as an international community, we take care and properly manage that full Earth system functioning? And how do we put in place the new institutions, such as a Global Environment Agency and International Court for the Environment, to ensure we have a stable governance system to manage this really urgent common challenge? So also just a note for your information about implementation of these proposals. Sure, these big international governance proposals sound very positive, but can we actually get them implemented? We've established an international civil society and like-minded state platform called Mobilizing an Earth Governance Alliance. And we've established this because such so-called smart coalitions of global civil society, like-minded states, also working with professionals, including health professionals, should be fully integrated in such a movement and a call for improved international Earth system governance, planetary governance. So this has been very, very effective in the past to establish very significant new international institutions. So one of those is the International Court, the International Criminal Court, which was established quite rapidly. When they started to get organized, it was only in the 1990s, over about a span of about 5 years, where they were able to really catalyze the establishment of a whole new, really important international institutions. So we're trying to apply this sort of social technology in catalyzing different international governance reforms. So just to mention also briefly, one of the overarching concepts, as I've alluded to already, is this notion of Earth system governance. And there's a whole network of academics across various fields, interdisciplinary. It's an interdisciplinary effort to think about, what kind of new concepts and approaches do we need to now transition to an Earth system governance approach. And, academics have thought, okay, the sort of top-down approach versus the bottom-up in terms of, various approaches to Earth system governance. But from our perspective, we think these perspectives are really interdependent. You can have, coordinating functions, which are centralized, which are at the international level, which should be harmonious and synergistic with all the various other levels of governance. So regional levels, for example, the EU, national levels, subnational levels, and you already see this happening, for example, in terms of existing international environmental governance, where there's a really healthy synergistic interplay between the international, national, local, regional, but this could be strengthened and even thought through in even more sophisticated and robust ways. Another overarching concept we're thinking about and keeping in mind in terms of our institutional innovations is this concept of adaptive governance, which is being developed also in the literature, because as you saw with the Earth system tipping points, the complexities that we inherently have with our international ecological systems, which are then interdependent with complex different factors for health and well-being. And then the complexities of our international system, which can be very nonlinear as well, and a complex system of many different stakeholders participating. We're thinking about, what are some of the key principles of quote unquote adaptive governance. One colleague, Adam Day, has written a recent book on this. How can we design organizations that are adaptive, that can foresee, different shifts and risks in the system, can be constantly learning, etc. So I'll just go through quickly a couple of our concrete governance proposals, innovation proposals, so you can just get a taste of what we're working on. So firstly, the climate COP reform that I mentioned, these are a few of the points that we're actively working on. For example, how do we really improve, again, implementation and accountability? States have been very reluctant generally in international law to hold themselves to account. The sovereign state approach is still dominant. So how can we take steps forward there? How can we make this very unwieldy multilateral process a bit more streamlined for speed and scale of implementation, amplifying science, etc. So we're actively working on that. Also, I think another important proposal, which is highly relevant for health systems, is a proposal for an international policy clearinghouse or innovation hub. And these are a few initiatives that are ongoing that we've been discussing with, in terms of how can we maybe put our efforts together to have a cataloging using AI, using the best of current technology, to have a policy overview and search functions across climate, planetary boundary issues. And it would be very interesting also to include health and environmental health kind of dimensions and policies in such a database. I'm sure those are already being captured. But the notion here is that we really need to accelerate our innovative thinking with respect to policy. Our traditional notion is, it should take many years or even decades for legislative policy shifts at the national level, at various levels. But because of the nature of the challenges, we have to think carefully, have policies of excellence, but be much more innovative and quicker than we're used to being in this policy space. Also, one thing that we're working on that we hope to, again, work very intensively with the health community is a potential General Assembly, UN General Assembly resolution on planetary emergency, which many of the scientists working on Earth system science and climate science say that they argue that we are indeed in an emergency situation at the planetary Earth system level, which is not something that we're used to thinking about. It's a kind of emergency or a crisis, UN system, the triple planetary crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. We're not used to thinking about this kind of emergency at the international level, which is, this multifaceted, complex ecological emergency, again, with these very serious cascading health effects. So we're working with that, working with different like-minded states. What can the General Assembly do to try to up the understanding of the international community of what's at stake at the moment? Also, the Secretary General has proposed convening a sort of emergency platform in the face of global shocks and risks. And this comes out of an international health crisis, the COVID pandemic, where he said, it would be really good if we had a facility for an emergency platform where we could just bring key international institutions together with states, with other stakeholders, to address a global crisis. So we're suggesting that such a platform for high-level coordination, action focus should already be convened for planetary emergency. And then the proposal I mentioned for full Earth system functioning, monitoring, and risk analysis, which we think the international community badly needs at this moment. Then the midterm or the medium-term proposals that we have, a global environment agency, which could be, we wouldn't necessarily have to create a new agency, even though former heads of state have recommended, such an agency to deal with these macro complex problems at scale for the international community. But we could, foresee a significant strengthening of the UN Environment Program, or the establishment of a new enhanced global environment type agency, which has certain features, which employs this Earth system governance perspective and these adaptive governance perspectives, that is really a learning institution and takes all that the international community has learned already in the sphere of environment and climate, and really consolidates it and makes sure we have next generation institutions that are really equipped to tackle the challenges that we have. International Court for the Environment, I won't go into that in depth as you have the slides, but you saw that previous slide about all of the different multiple international environmental agreements, yet we lack really a venue to enforce these agreements and make sure these obligations are being upheld by various actors, including states, but all other non-state actors. So we're looking into, on an expert level at the moment, if such an institution were to be created. And again, it's not a new idea. Many academics have proposed it. What would such an institution look like? How could we architect it to ensure it addresses those justice challenges at the international level? So finally, to conclude my short presentation, so climate governance system is highly fragmented, lacks effective accountability mechanisms, hindering climate justice implementation and efforts. And so this is really the sphere we're trying to work in. How do we improve our international governance? The WHO, from our experience, is playing, whoops, sorry about that. I'll just go back to the last slide.
Sorry, I can't help with that. You can learn more about logging your health data with...
Oh, sorry about that. Siri leapt in. The WHO is really playing a positive, supportive role, as we've seen, a snapshot of that. And we've been very impressed to see how the WHO is also leaping into these overall climate, One Health narratives, notions of how deeply intertwined, climate change issues are with human health. And we're really working hard to how do we provide whole of system solutions also across different fields, including the health field. We very much want to work with health professionals in terms of the advocacy and education about, the next steps we need to take to tackle our Earth system risks. So public health practitioners can be absolutely key allies and repositories of expertise to indeed make sure we defragment our international systems and the way we think about health and climate change and all of the planetary boundaries. So just to conclude, we're in a very exciting time for humanity, a lot of extraordinary science coming out, but of course, such a lot of challenges. But so far in the Commission, we've had really extraordinary collaboration with high-level officials and experts, including, governments who really want to work together. So we'll be proceeding with our work. So thank you, Farhang. I'll end there.
Thank you very much indeed, Maja, Groff, that this is really, there's a wealth of information and ideas in there, which we often don't hear about in health circles, and we're not trained in it. So I think this session is very, very important for us as health practitioners and leaders to reflect on the content and also what it means for us in our work around climate action. And copies of this particular session will be available. So many thanks. There is a gold mine of information in there for us to learn from. It's my privilege now to invite. There'll be questions at the end. I think let's hear the presentation from the Chief of Staff at the Climate Governance, Eoin Jackson, who's the Chief of Staff of Climate. He's a scholar. He's also a PhD candidate at LSE, and his major area of interest has been on climate litigation and climate governance. He's an attorney of law of state in New York and holds various degrees at Harvard and Trinity and so on. So it's my privilege now to invite Eoin Jackson to share a case study so we can ruminate on further on this issue. Over to you, Eoin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Farhang, and thank you, Maja, for that excellent presentation. Good morning, everyone, or good evening, depending on your time zone. My name is Eoin, and I am Chief of Staff and Legal Fellow at the Climate Governance Commission. I'm also a PhD candidate at the London School of Economics, where I focus in particular on climate litigation. I'm going to be discussing as a case study the role of the climate litigation in the pursuit of climate justice. And in particular, linking that with sort of our broader discussion that we've had this morning about the need for global governance reform and the role that climate litigation can play in advancing efforts to achieve this global governance reform. So I'm first going to give you a quick overview of the current state of play in climate litigation. I'm then going to discuss the role of public health and public health officials in advancing climate litigation. I'm going to discuss some exciting recent developments we've seen with climate litigation. And finally, I'll conclude with some sort of potential future approaches to climate litigation, particularly in the context of the broader global governance reform movement. So the first thing to highlight is that climate litigation has arisen largely as a response to the failures of our current global governance system. As Maja has already mentioned, the global governance system is highly fragmented when it comes to climate change. There are a multitude of bilateral, multilateral environmental agreements, and there is a lack of a centralized accountability or enforcement mechanism to pursue relevant climate goals, meaning that many states are essentially left to their own discretion to pursue climate goals and objectives as they see fit. In response to that, many plaintiffs, members of civil society, those who are worst affected by climate change, have turned to the courts in an effort to achieve some form of justice, both in terms of obtaining compensation for loss and damage as a result of climate change, but also to advocate for stronger climate action through court-ordered remedies that might support the establishment of stronger climate legal frameworks and or order the government to do particular actions that support climate action. Litigation has arisen against both state and non-state actors in recent years, and the litigation against non-state actors really continues to grow as further evidence of the extent of corporate emissions is released to the general public. And this litigation has taken place across a whole variety of jurisdictions using a variety of different legal approaches. This is important in the context of our work because, as Maja has already noticed, there is currently no international court for the environment or centralized international legal authority to take this variety of cases. And so litigants have resorted to both domestic jurisdictions and also regional jurisdictions, like, for example, the European Court of Human Rights. And this litigation has really exploded since 2015 after the arrival of the Paris Agreement. In 2023 alone, 230 new cases were filed across the globe. And there have been thousands of cases taken since 2015. So this area really continues to grow in popularity, both for members of civil society and also for lawyers who are trying to find ways within the existing legal system to identify and make some sort of progress on advancing climate action. In line with this, there has also been the identification of a rights turn in climate litigation. So this refers to the increased reliance on human rights to form the basis of arguments in court and/or the use of regional and international human rights instruments to pursue relevant cases, really linking to the general support there is for strengthening the role of human rights within climate change. And many of these cases are beginning to come to fruition now, most recently with the case of Klimas and Eoin in Switzerland in the European Court of Human Rights in 2024, which I will discuss a little bit in detail later in this presentation. These cases are taking, as I say, a variety of approaches and pursuing a variety of remedies to try and achieve some form of climate justice. But importantly, they also highlight the current gaps in our global governance and regulatory systems. Essentially, climate litigation is trying to fill these gaps in some way by identifying particular areas where the governments or corporations have not done enough to address climate change and trying to get the courts to do something to force governments and corporations to address these gaps. Maja, if you could turn to the next slide, that would be great. Yeah, perfect. So public health and public health officials can play a really key role in advancing climate litigation cases. Firstly, and perhaps most importantly, the health impacts of climate change can form a basis for demonstrating the harm element of a climate litigation case. This is very important because in most forms of litigation, you need to be able to show, as the litigant or the plaintiff, that you have experienced some form of harm. Climate change has a variety of health impacts, both in terms of its increase in the risk of infectious diseases, but also the extreme heat, which can lead to detrimental impacts, particularly for vulnerable members of society. And indeed, we have already seen that expert evidence from public health officials and practitioners can support arguments that there has been a violation of human rights. This was particularly evident in the case of Klimas and Eoin in Switzerland, which took place in 2024 in the European Court of Human Rights. In that case, a group of elderly women from Switzerland claimed that their rights had been violated as a result of the health impacts of climate change, which had led to extreme heat, which had caused adverse health outcomes. The public health evidence that was available to support these claims helped inform the court in identifying that there had been a harm. As a result, they were able to identify that there had been violations of the European Convention on Human Rights, and they noted that Switzerland's lack of ambition when it came to climate action constituted a violation of human rights. Therefore, they were able to provide some remedies to support climate justice. Public health evidence can also be incredibly important in linking climate cases with previous efforts of a similar kind to sort of link environmental harm with health impacts, which can help overcome some procedural and substantive hurdles to success, depending on the jurisdiction. So in this regard, there has been a big movement in the US to pursue major fossil fuel companies for their contribution to climate change, both in terms of their excessive greenhouse gas emissions, but also their alleged efforts to obfuscate climate science and delay ambitious climate action. Showing that there have been adverse health outcomes as a result of these actions can be very useful in helping overcome issues such as whether plaintiffs have standing or whether plaintiffs can show causation between excessive greenhouse gas emissions and particular harm to members of the population. We go to the next slide. There have been some really interesting and really exciting developments recently in climate litigation, which also kind of bolstered the movement for global governance reform. Firstly, there had been some new pathways to accountability, which have been approached using human rights instruments. So I've already mentioned Klimas and Eoin, but the Inter-American Court of Human Rights is also in the process of formulating an advisory opinion on climate change and human rights. So they will be directly considering the extent to which climate change impacts on human rights and recommending some really interesting and really innovative remedies potentially to advance climate accountability efforts in Latin America. We've also seen a big interest in more cases against non-state actors, so corporate actors effectively. And there's some really interesting examples of innovative approaches to law being taken across a variety of jurisdictions. Two in particular I want to highlight are the cases of Luya RWE and Smith and Fontera. Luya RWE went to trial 2 weeks ago, actually, in Germany. It involves a Peruvian farmer. Bringing a case in Germany against the German energy company RWE, arguing that RWE's emissions have caused a significant risk of flooding to his farm in Peru. So this is the first time that a court has accepted that the transboundary. Yes?
Ewan, we have about 2,000 people, half of which are not English speakers. If you could speak a little bit slowly, that would be very
No
helpful.
problem.
Sorry.
No problem. I can slow down. That's okay.
There's also translation available for non-English speakers if you press a particular button. Apologies for that. This is of a global audience, and I've had a number of texts. If you could speak a little bit more slowly, that'd be very...
No problem. That's okay. I can slow down. So as I was saying, Luya RWE is a really interesting case in Germany where a Peruvian farmer has sued the German energy company RWE, arguing that the emissions that have come from RWE have significantly heightened the risk of flooding to his farm in Peru. And the German district court has accepted that the RWE could potentially be held liable for the impact of its global greenhouse gas emissions on this farm in Peru. So it's a really exciting development in terms of potential opportunities for accountability on non-state actors. Smith and Fontera is a case in New Zealand where the plaintiff, a Maori climate activist, is suing a number of large greenhouse gas emitters in New Zealand. And what's important for that case is that the New Zealand Supreme Court has said that there might be potential to consider a new tort or a new sort of model of law of climate damage, whereby major emitters in New Zealand could be held directly liable for their climate damage. So these cases are currently in the trial stages of the procedures, but they do potentially open up new opportunities to increase accountability on non-state actors. Finally, and sort of critically, there has been a huge movement to introduce an advisory opinion at the International Court of Justice on states' responsibilities for climate change. An advisory opinion is non-binding, but it's very useful in terms of formulating key sort of normative aspects of international law and will really develop the law in this area. It's the first time that the International Court of Justice has considered climate change within its sort of broader governance framework. It might also open up some future opportunities for litigation. It also builds broader support for the governance reform movement, particularly with regard to introducing and adapting legal structures that are more suitable for the Anthropocene. While these recent developments are very exciting, these cases and climate litigation in general is primarily strategic. It's not a solution in and of itself to major climate challenges, but it's useful through things like raising awareness, media campaigns, illustrating the extent to which climate change is impacting on vulnerable regions. And it also provides opportunities to drive normative shifts in terms of how we think about governance, how we think about law, linking more generally with our efforts to build global governance reform. So next slide, if that's okay. Finally, and sort of as some concluding points on the future of climate litigation, firstly, in terms of public health is likely to continue to play a role in future cases as the effects of climate change become worse, leading to more and more adverse health outcomes. In turn, this might mean that previously sort of difficult jurisdictions, i.e. jurisdictions which have been very reluctant to take climate cases, might become more open to arguments as their jurisdictions are impacted. In other words, as more and more countries experience these adverse health outcomes, it becomes easier to link climate litigation cases to models of law that judiciaries can understand, which might in turn drive some successful outcomes. There are also some interesting emerging areas within climate justice litigation. One in particular to highlight is just transition litigation. This is litigation that is being taken by, for example, workers who are being impacted by green energy policies. And they really highlight the importance of equity and in human rights in terms of driving climate solutions that work for all of us. So this is kind of speculated to be an emerging area in future years. There's also an increased focus, both within academia and in civil society, on how key concepts, which Maya outlined, like planetary boundaries and tipping points, could be useful for future climate litigation cases. Tipping points have been considered by some judiciaries in the context of their discussion of the particular risks posed by climate change, but they could become useful sort of framing points or hooks to take future cases. The planetary boundaries framework is also being developed further by lawyers and considered further by lawyers to identify means through which it could pursue future pathways for climate litigation. And this links to sort of the broader push for new approaches to law, which can adapt to the current climate emergency that we are experiencing through new holistic models such as Earth system justice. And as the effects of climate change continue to multiply, as there is more and more interest in climate litigation, we're likely to see more and more interest in finding ways to make law work for the current triple planetary crisis that we are experiencing, which in turn links back to the broader proposals outlined by Maya and supported by the Climate Governance Commission. So I will leave things there, but very happy to take questions, and thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much indeed, Owen. That's excellent, actually. And the case study was largely around strategic litigation as being a key issue. And Eoin, if you could just show the final slide. We're now going to have a discussion and have the questions which our colleagues have been next slide, please. Eric, you promised to show this, right?
Yes, just a second.
I just wanted to highlight specifically around strategic litigation and the power of law, the Global Consortium for Health Education in collaboration with the Schools of Public Health, in fact, has produced a report on a guide for public health professionals around climate litigation. And this is a useful report because I think some of the jargon used by lawyers and so on, we're not trained in this, and hopefully this session will educate us around this, because we really need to get into better understanding of the issues which our distinguished lawyers have highlighted, and understand the language. But also this issue does not only belong to the lawyers, it also belongs to us. We also have a distinct role. And this particular report, which was signed off by the major public health organizations of around the world, highlights that public health professional mandate not only requires development of science, in other words, saying how bad climate change and publish it in journals, but also meaningful action. And one of the litigation is a well-established part of the health advocacy toolkit. So we have used it as public health leaders. Next slide, please. Next slide, please, Eric. Thank you. So this report, you can download it, and it highlights what specifically our health role is in this. We want to update this report, and it's also in the chat. It is there through the Schools of Public Health and so on. So if you didn't understand some of the stuff which hopefully the session will help us around climate justice, governance, and litigation and so on, this report will give you references and so on. And if anyone is particularly interested in this piece of work, please let the organizers know. We can link you. So thanks, Eric. Now we will take the important questions and have a discussion. If you could take the screen off, Eric. And thank you very much indeed, panelists, for a very, very stimulating and important presentation at this particular time. One of the recurring themes which come up while Eric is looking through the individual questions, one of the themes which came out throughout in the questions and answers was, we are in a state in the world at this particular time. We are in a sort of polycrisis because of the politics, rising in nationalism, the current narratives, dig, and all this sort of stuff which is going on, and the crisis in governance at the moment. And the world is in turmoil. So what does it actually mean in terms of climate action and what we should do as public health leaders and professionals? What does it mean about multilateralism, all these things which are our core public health values and actions? So each of you, if you could have a bite-sized, briefly respond to, many of the questions referred to this frustration and concern about the world situation, the geopolitical And Ilaria Russo talked very elegantly about this in her question. And broadly, it was around this sort of issues. Maja, perhaps first.
Yeah, I can start. And indeed, unfortunately, we are seeing, of course, these very tough, resurgent geopolitical dynamics, but also erosion in what we had hoped to be more mature democracies and the rule of law, etc. So, I mean, I think we need to learn from world history in the sense that, sorry, there have, of course, been different trends and evolutions of the international community in the past. So we don't know what will happen now within the international system. For example, are we at a League of Nations moment? I mean, it won't be, of course, we're in a very different place than, when the League of Nations was formed and then basically dissolved and replaced by the UN after the Second World War. But we've gone through, very intense cataclysms, of course, at the international level in terms of military armed conflict. And let's hope we don't have to go through another paroxysm like that now. But certainly from my perspective as an international lawyer, one could see the seeds of such a dissolution at the moment, and these very dysfunctional military conflicts, etc., in the international system because the UN Charter was not strengthened in its 80 years of existence. It was adopted in 1945, of course, after the Second World War, and really forms the core backbone for our international governance system, where organizations like the WHO and the climate and environmental conventions sort of has sprung up and evolved. But the international community didn't do that, core strengthening of our architecture for peaceful settlement of disputes, which is also a major health issue. If we have, various forms of armed conflict, of course, absolutely calamitous effects on individual collective health. And now we're indeed in this polycrisis. So what the way I'm looking at things is, during the Second World War, there was all sorts of foment around what should our governance system look like? How do we upgrade? How do we move forward as an international community after this terrible war ends? So with all the very dysfunctional dynamics we're seeing now, we have to continue to think carefully, to work on how we strengthen our international collaboration, our institutions, our governance, what we need to achieve. And so like-minded professionals around the world really have to work together, more than ever, to navigate, to really try to steady the boat at this time. And there's still a lot, of course, that's ongoing that can be achieved. And also in the multilateral system, it's also quite agile, where even small groups of states can achieve a lot in the international system. So that's what we're working on. How do we architect and keep thinking, what are the institutions and approaches of excellence that we can architect at this time? And then at a certain point in the international community, we know that the pendulum will swing back eventually, in terms of also, very, very likely, given the nature and the gravity of our challenges, we will have to have another moment of multilateral effort, leadership, consolidation to press forward again. So I think we all should be working as hard as we can in the current environment and really building on all those positive trends, all that incredible international cooperation that's often happening at the professional to professional level with like-minded states. So to continue working hard and also waiting for that moment where we can really spring forward as an international community as well.
Ewan, do you want to add anything, or shall we just move on?
Yeah, I mean, I completely echo Maya's thoughts. I might just add briefly that one sort of major shift that we've seen in the past years is real interest and real passion from youth climate justice activists. As an example, from sort of the climate litigation perspective, the International Court of Justice advisory opinion was really spearheaded and driven forward by efforts from Pacific law students, young Pacific law students who worked with the small island developing states to bring a resolution at the General Assembly, which in turn led to this advisory opinion at the ICJ. And the Commission has really sought to build off this sort of aspirations and passions of youth climate justice activists through our active inclusion of youth climate justice activists as commissioners and partners. So there's a strong demand from sort of my generation, younger generations for greater action, and we recognize the need for that action to be coordinated on a multilateral level through stronger global governance systems.
That's very helpful. And for interest, Eoin actually has a young lawyers group which has been now set up in the UK and across the world, and we're trying to link him with public health people. So we can collaborate on this. Eric, do you have one question you particularly want to put to the panel?
Yes, I think there's a lot of questions that has reached us to both speakers, Ian and Maja, and a lot of them are covering essentially what we just discussed, the political turmoils that are going on at the moment, especially with the US retreating from Paris Agreement and WHO membership. So I'm not going to repeat all those questions again. However, there's a couple of other questions going into different directions. One, for example, from Jasmine. She asks, the statistics on climate change mitigation can seem discouraging. What advice would you give to individuals with minimal influence in their organizations who still want to drive meaningful change? So I presume this is a question that is going more into the more individual level, because it is probably perceived by many people that a lot of processes are going on in levels that they almost have a limited or no influence on at all. What can be done by the individual, maybe health professional, public health professional, or just person?
Eoin, do you want to start? Because I think there's so much that you and other
Yeah.
younger generation are doing that is so impactful, also at the international level.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really good question, because sometimes I think if you're sitting in your room and you're reading the news, you sort of think maybe you're the only one who's extremely concerned about the variety of statistics and that you can't really drive change. What I would do firsthand is identify various sort of networks or groups that are working on climate action, both in terms of broader civil society movements like the Climate Governance Commission, but also direct action movements who are looking to protest and advocate for change at a local and domestic level. As an example, maybe I'll speak sort of from personal experience. I have been working with a number of law students, both in the US and the UK, for a past number of years, who are very concerned about the role of law firms in continuing to advocate and facilitate fossil fuel transactions, even as all of the science contradicts the need for further fossil fuel extraction, particularly in parts of the global north. And so I work together with a group of students on my campuses to set up an accountability movement which identifies law firms who are committed to sustainability and working on renewable energy products, and also identifies the law firms who are not doing as much in climate action. And that really helps to inform professional networks, future professional networks, on who their allies are, who their partners are, and how best to link with the broader climate governance movement and climate justice movement that we've seen. There is a lot of activity going on at all times, and identifying smaller ways that you can get involved with climate justice can be a really useful way of trying to make a contribution, no matter how small you may think that contribution may be.
Maja, do you want to add anything?
And yeah, I'll just add, because I think even one individual joining with other groups, cooperate, can make a huge impact. And just a few examples to underline this fact. Eoin mentioned the International Court of Justice advisory opinion. That movement for that unprecedented advisory opinion, which had to go through the UN General Assembly, essentially every state in the world had to vote on this advisory opinion to send it to the International Court of Justice. And this effort for this advisory opinion on the obligations of states for climate change started with just one law student in the Pacific, and then grew to a few colleagues, also young law students, and then grew to still quite a small group of international law students working together. And they got the assistance of their law professor to help them understand how they navigated through the international system, got the advice also of other international legal experts how to frame the question, and then worked with small island developing states to affect this really huge, impactful step forward for the international community for an authoritative advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice in The Hague, going by way of New York with the General Assembly. So that's one example. Another example, and World Youth for Climate Justice, they still might be working on different. We're working. We've invited them next week to a strategy meeting, get them involved on some of our governance proposals. Also, the Youth Negotiators Academy. It's another incredible youth catalyzed and led initiative where they have agreements with countries around the world to put official youth delegate on the delegations to the climate COPs and now the COPs and meetings of other environmental treaties. And that's mushroomed so fast. I don't know how many youth negotiators they're at the moment. It was 50 or 100 last time I checked, but it's absolutely incredible. And some of those youth, within about a year or two, were then made head of their delegation for some countries because they had such excellent training and were so devoted and focused. So just to note, like even at the international levels, there can be tremendous steps forward with a good idea, insight, and then working together with the right expertise. But also what I hope that different health professionals, young health of different ages, the strategic litigation, of course, is very important, but also policy shifts and development. I think individuals, we tend to, sometimes focus, on only, of course, we should be attentive to our individual behavior, lifestyle, etc. But individuals can be very, very influential and powerful in terms of policy shifts or policy change. And just one example on that, because now there's also like a whole body of work on effective policies for climate ecological issues at various levels of governance. And we've heard from Eoin that the health argumentation is very effective for courts and policymakers. But one example, students in the 2nd grade, 6th grade, and 7th grade in a school in Doha, Qatar, managed to have a little campaign and change legislation in the state of Qatar on single-use plastics. That was just their after-school club. They managed to do, a legislative shift at the national level. So I think there's a lot of scope for being engaged in these really important policy shifts at the various levels. It can be city level, it can be state level, it can be national level, etc. So there's, I think, a lot to do in that respect as well.
I think this is quite an important issue, and I hope this educational program which we're doing has created an momentum in itself for us to join alliances and so on. And I think the river is flowing. We're on the right side of history, so whatever action we have, I think, will be productive. And the health arguments for climate action are very, very strong. The COP report, the WHO report, the health arguments are very, very strong because it's not seen as sort of party political and broad. So I think this is a very important question. While Eric is looking for another question, I'm just wondering from a public health side, from a health side, what does justice and climate justice look like? Because we talked a lot about how horrible climate change is, its impacts and so on. But what are the outcomes we're working for, and what is the role of health? Where are we going with health, colleagues, around climate justice? What does climate justice actually look like? Either of you briefly, perhaps, while Eric is looking for another question.
Yeah, I'll just two quick thoughts from my perspective and working on the commission for a number of years. And part of the reason I raised a number of times in my presentation the international finance piece is because it's so fundamental for the justice issues within climate, environmental change, and health. And as you may know, it's been a real challenge for the international community to raise the amounts previously committed to, and now there's a new commitment for international finance from governments for climate adaptation and mitigation, let alone also the newer loss and damage fund for climate change. So I think this is like an intersecting issue in terms of what, from the health side, justice looks like. We need to raise new levels of international public finance. That sounds sort of, I guess, like a little bit technical because it's about the international architecture for raising new levels of public international finance. For example, there's a new tax treaty that is being negotiated at the UN that has implications for this. The International Anti-Corruption Court that I've been working on also has implication for this. For this, more illicit financial flows leave the African continent, for example, than flow in development aid each year. Also, Brazil, South Africa, Germany, a number of other countries proposed an effort to have a global minimum tax on high net worth individuals around the world. Extremely important. We have such tremendous resources, in terms of this cohort of humanity, but we're not deploying them for absolutely urgent adaptation, mitigation efforts for climate change, and then all the efforts for biodiversity, for nature. The Biodiversity Commission has a huge funding gap. So this is a space that really intersects. We need absolutely new levels of funding for international public health, for achievement of the SDGs and for climate. And a key tension in the international community has been indeed around very intense issues of enduring poverty, lack of social protections, lack of healthcare, education, and not having the requisite funding for those. And funding for climate change. A lot of countries, for example, in the developing world, say, well, we have these urgent human development challenges, which include health, basic health, ensuring. So anyways, this is a cross-cutting issue in terms of raising new sources of public international finance, which I think we have the techniques, or we have the capacity to raise that, but we need a lot more efforts to show leadership and put in place the new systems.
Ewan, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, just briefly, I think one thing that public health is particularly useful for in the context of climate justice is showing the extent to which climate change impacts on particular minorities, because the adverse health outcomes also tend to impact on the minorities who are already being affected by climate change. Women, elderly people, people with disabilities. Public health can really help illustrate the extent to which it's important not to leave people behind as we address climate change, and also the importance of addressing climate change because we need to protect these people. So from a litigation perspective, that's very useful in terms of trying to advance successful outcomes. From sort of the finance and governance perspective, it's useful in identifying relevant projects that protect these minorities, ensure that they are included in our broader climate response.
Very much indeed, very helpful. I think you, Eric, there may be room for one final question from, if you.
Yes, sure. So maybe two aspects. So there's a couple of participants asking if there are live platforms that are tracking current climate justice activities in action globally. So you can either answer now if there's anything that you think of spontaneously, or afterwards you can happily pass on these informations, and we will in turn pass them to the participants through our website. And there's one question that is reaching us. as we have a lot of public health and healthcare professionals in the audience, that I think is very, very good. What role do you visualize the primary care doctors and nurses and public health professionals who are on the front line with patients and communities in perfect positions to advocate climate actions to the general population to disseminate best climate sensitive actions?
Great. Very briefly from both of you, Maja, I think, or Eoin. Eoin, do you want to go first? Who's going to go?
Want to start?
Yeah, firstly on the live climate justice tracking points, two I'd highlight is one, if you want to keep track of climate cases, the Sabin Center at Columbia maintains a database of all of the various climate litigation cases being taken across the world. So if that's of interest, I would look at that. In terms of tracking climate laws and climate policies, the Grantham Institute at LSE has a climate laws of the world database, which we sort of identify the various laws across the world that are being taken. And this also forms part of our sort of broader governance reforms proposals, is that we establish sort of a global climate policy and innovation hub, which could indeed identify and track these various policies to sort of centralize what is at the moment quite a sort of fragmented approach to tracking these various climate justice issues. Secondly, on the role of local doctors can play, I think one key aspect is awareness raising. So highlighting the direct links between the adverse impacts of climate change and the adverse health impacts. And there are various professional networks that already try to do this. One I'm aware of just in my own home country is Irish Doctors for the Environment, which is a group of local doctors, local GPs who try to raise awareness about climate change and also advocate for policy shifts within government to encourage greater action on climate change. So leveraging your networks, trying to identify opportunities to speak on the health impacts of climate change, trying to show that it's not sort of this abstract concept, it affects our day-to-day reality and will continue to affect our day-to-day reality, can be a really useful way to sort of bring climate change to localities and local members of the population. Maja?
Wonderful. Yes, and just to add one more resource to international or justice initiatives around the world, there's the Climate Litigation Network that's working concretely on litigation across various countries. It's a really interesting, robust network, so I'd point you towards their site. Then also I would invite you to explore the Mobilizing an Earth Governance Alliance website. It's a coalition we're building with different professional organizations. We also have a business engagement platform, and we're still building it up in terms of really what we see as key prioritized international governance reforms that we can work together on. So I'll put the link in the chat. And then for frontline health workers, completely agree with Eoin, and I think because unfortunately one of the factors in our polycrisis is the misinformation environment and how compromised our information ecosystems often are. And unfortunately, for example, when we saw the Los Angeles wildfires, we saw a whole lot of very strange misinformation also surge up at the same time. So I think frontline workers just really helping citizens, anyone they encounter, think about scientific resources that are reliable, and also understanding Earth system science, that climate change is real, what the sort of nonlinear effects are, and also the nature of the scientific method, that it's a process of scientists criticize each other, and it evolves and progresses. And also, articulating really the high gold standard of climate science we have now, that it is indeed anthropogenic. So we really need to make sure citizens around the world understand also the international nature of this challenge, and that we must work together as an international community. I think this is also a really important part of it. I've heard also conspiracy theories about the WHO from some citizens. So to really demystify and to validate that these are just basic cooperative efforts in the best interests of all, that we should all be really working hard on together.
Thank you very much indeed for a very, very stimulating session. There have been lots of thanks and appreciation to thank our speakers for a very robust session. Thank you very much indeed on behalf of the consortium for your presentations and so on. As you can see, there are various public health weeks. There's one on 7th of 11th focusing on climate change. There's also in May, the European Public Health Association Public Health Week. But I think we need to not only do it during public health weeks, it is a cross-cutting issue, an issue of law, justice, governance, and so on, often don't have the platform. We often talk in public health circles about the harms around adaptations, but really we need to focus on doing around litigation and other issues, the ethical and moral dimensions. So more action and so on around the issues. So thank you very much indeed for the participants. There's still 1,200 who are still online, which is great at this time. There are a lot of questions around examinations and a lot of technical issues, which please join the WhatsApp group and you can ask these sort of other questions around examinations and so on, because after the 10th session there will be. So on behalf of the consortium, thank you very much indeed to our distinguished speakers. If there are any technical questions, please join the WhatsApp group, and good night, good morning, and the usual ending greetings to all the colleagues, and I hope we can join together as a group for more action rather than just looking at the impacts of this, because it's bad thing is coming, but we now need to be positive around positive actions to get a better world for all of us. Good night and good evening to everybody. Bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Farhang. Thank you, Maja. Thank you, Eoin. Goodbye. Goodbye.